What if the delay you are frustrated about today is actually the proof that God is still working on something far bigger than you imagine? What if the silence you are experiencing is not God's absence but His preparation? Tonight I want you to stay till the very end, because this message may completely change how you see your waiting, your pain, and your future. Beloved friends, let me ask you a question. Have you ever trusted God, prayed sincerely, believed faithfully, and yet nothing seemed to change? You prayed, but the door stayed closed. You believed, but the situation grew harder. You trusted, but the answer did not come the way you expected. Many people stop believing at this point. Many give up right here. But listen carefully. This moment is not the end of God's plan, it is the middle of it. If you walk away too soon, you may miss the greatest miracle God has prepared for your life. That is why I urge you, stay with this message until the end. Because what God is about to reveal may strengthen your faith and restore your hope. When we speak about trusting God's plan, we must first understand this truth. God's plan is always greater than our understanding. Human understanding is limited by time, experience, emotion, and perspective. We see life in moments, but God sees life in generations. We see a single chapter, but God has already written the entire book. Many people struggle not because God has failed them, but because they are trying to judge an eternal plan with temporary eyesight. When life does not unfold the way we expected, we quickly assume something has gone wrong. Yet very often nothing is wrong at all except our perspective. God never promised that His plan would always be easy to understand. He promised that His plan would always be good. There is a difference. Good does not always feel comfortable, and purpose does not always look pleasant in the beginning. When a seed is planted, it disappears into the soil, surrounded by darkness, pressure, and silence. If that seed had a voice, it might think it was buried and forgotten, but in reality it was positioned for growth. In the same way, many people feel buried by circumstances, but they are actually planted by God. We must remember that God operates from a higher level of wisdom. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and His ways are higher than our ways. What seems like confusion to us is often coordination in the hands of God. What looks like loss may be preparation. What feels like rejection may be redirection. God does not waste seasons. Every season of your life carries a divine purpose, even the seasons you do not understand. Often we want God to explain His plan before we follow it. We want clarity before obedience. But faith does not work that way. Faith is trusting God without having all the answers. If God explained everything in advance, faith would no longer be faith, it would simply be agreement. God invites us to trust Him not because we understand Him, but because He understands us. He knows our weaknesses, our fears, our questions, and still He asks us to walk with Him. Many people become discouraged because they compare their journey with someone else's journey. They see others succeeding faster, progressing quicker, or receiving answers sooner. But God does not copy plans, He custom designs them. Your path may look slower, but it is uniquely crafted for your calling. If God delays something in your life, it is not because He has forgotten you, but because timing is critical to destiny. Receiving something too early can be just as dangerous as receiving it too late. There are moments when God allows things to happen that we do not understand at all. Doors close without explanation. Relationships end unexpectedly. Opportunities disappear suddenly. In those moments, it is easy to question God's goodness. But faith declares that even when we do not understand God's actions, we can still trust His heart. God sees consequences we cannot see. He knows what will harm us in the future, even if it looks attractive in the present. Sometimes God's plan requires breaking our dependence on our own strength. As long as we understand everything, we rely on ourselves. But when understanding runs out, faith begins to operate. God often leads His people into situations where human wisdom is not enough, so divine wisdom can take over. This is not to weaken us, but to teach us where our true source lies. Dependence on God is not weakness, it is alignment. We must also understand that God's plan is progressive. It unfolds step by step. He rarely reveals the entire picture at once, because if He did, fear might stop us from moving forward. Instead, He gives just enough light for the next step. Each step of obedience reveals the next instruction. This keeps our relationship with God active and alive. We walk with Him daily, not just once. When life becomes uncertain, the greatest danger is making permanent decisions based on temporary confusion. Many people abandon God's plan because they cannot see immediate results. But spiritual growth often happens invisibly before it becomes visible. Roots grow underground before fruits appear above ground. God is often doing His deepest work in places we cannot see. Understanding God's plan also requires patience. Impatience is one of the greatest enemies of faith. When we rush God, we may end up outside His will. God's timing is not controlled by pressure, tears, or comparison. His timing is governed by wisdom and love. What God has promised will surely come to pass, but it will come in the right season. God's plan is also shaped by purpose, not comfort. He is more concerned about who you are becoming than what you are receiving. Many blessings require maturity to sustain them. Without preparation, blessings can become burdens. God prepares the person before He releases the promise. This is why some prayers seem unanswered, when in reality God is still working on the vessel. Even when we fail, God's plan does not collapse. Human failure does not cancel divine purpose. God is powerful enough to redeem mistakes, restore lost years, and redirect lives. When we surrender our broken understanding to Him, He replaces it with divine direction. Trusting God's plan means accepting that we will not always understand what He is doing, why He is doing it, or how He is doing it. But we choose to believe that the one who holds the future is faithful, that the God who began the work knows exactly how it must unfold, that every step, every delay, every challenge fits into a plan far greater than what the human mind can comprehend. Trust is not something that is formed when everything is going well. Trust is revealed and strengthened when circumstances are uncertain and answers are delayed. Many people believe they trust God because they pray and confess faith, but true trust is exposed in the waiting season. Waiting has a way of bringing hidden doubts, fears, and expectations to the surface. It removes the distractions and forces the heart to confront what it truly believes about God. In the waiting, we discover whether our confidence is in God Himself or merely in the outcomes we desire. Waiting is uncomfortable because it takes away our sense of control. Human nature desires immediate results, quick solutions, and visible progress. When progress slows down or seems to stop, anxiety begins to rise. Yet waiting is often God's chosen classroom. In this classroom, lessons are not taught through explanations but through experience. God teaches patience not by speaking about it but by allowing time to stretch beyond our comfort. Through waiting, we learn that God is not obligated to operate according to our timetable. Many people confuse waiting with inactivity, but waiting in faith is not passive. It is an active posture of expectation, obedience, and prayer. While the body may appear still, the heart is learning endurance. Waiting trains the soul to rely on God rather than on visible evidence. Faith matures when it learns to stand firm without immediate reassurance. This is where trust deepens, not on the mountaintop but in the valley where answers are delayed. In the waiting season, God often works more on the inside than on the outside. While we are asking God to change our situation, God is shaping our character. Pride is softened, self-reliance is broken, and humility is formed. Waiting reveals our true motivations. It shows whether we seek God for who He is or only for what He can give. When blessings are delayed, the heart is purified from selfish desires and redirected toward a deeper relationship with God. Waiting also teaches discernment. When things move slowly, we become more sensitive to God's voice. In haste, people make emotional decisions, but in waiting, wisdom develops. God uses the silence to train His people to listen. Many times, clarity comes not through loud answers, but through quiet alignment. Waiting removes noise and allows the heart to become attentive to divine direction. There is also a strengthening that takes place during waiting. Muscles grow through resistance, and faith grows through pressure. Without resistance, there is no development. In the same way, without waiting, trust remains shallow. When prayers are answered instantly, faith is not challenged. But when answers are delayed, faith must stand on conviction rather than feelings. This kind of trust is not fragile. It becomes steady, anchored, and unshakable. Waiting exposes areas where we try to replace trust with effort. When God delays, many people attempt to force outcomes through human methods. They rush decisions, manipulate circumstances, or compromise values. Waiting teaches surrender. It teaches the heart to rest in God's sovereignty rather than striving in human strength. True trust learns to say that if God is not in it, it is better to wait than to move ahead without Him. Another purpose of waiting is to prepare us for responsibility. What God promises often carries weight. Without preparation, that weight can crush the unready heart. Waiting builds emotional, spiritual, and mental strength. It develops endurance so that when the promise arrives, it can be sustained. God is not only interested in giving blessings, but in ensuring that the person receiving them is equipped to handle them. Waiting also reshapes our understanding of success. Society measures success by speed and visibility, but God measures success by faithfulness. In the waiting season, God teaches His people to value obedience over outcomes. This kind of trust continues to obey even when results are unseen. It continues to serve, pray, and believe without applause or recognition. This is a deeper level of faith that is not dependent on circumstances. Many people grow weary in waiting because they expect waiting to be short. But waiting does not come with a timetable. God rarely reveals how long the process will take because trust must remain centered on Him, not on the duration. If the waiting season had a clear end date, people would endure it for the date rather than for the relationship. Waiting without knowing when the answer will come builds endurance that is rooted in faith, not in deadlines. Waiting also brings spiritual maturity. Immature faith demands answers, while mature faith rests in God's character. When trust grows, the need for constant reassurance decreases. The heart learns that God's silence does not mean God's absence. Even when heaven seems quiet, God is actively working behind the scenes. Trust learns to believe that unseen activity is taking place even when nothing appears to be changing. Through waiting, trust becomes less emotional and more intentional. Feelings fluctuate, but conviction remains. Waiting strips away emotional dependency and replaces it with steadfast belief. This is why some of the strongest believers are those who have waited the longest. Their trust is not based on excitement but on experience. They have seen God remain faithful through uncertainty, delay, and difficulty. In the waiting season, trust also learns gratitude. Instead of focusing only on what is missing, the heart begins to appreciate what is present. Gratitude shifts the focus from lack to provision. It reminds the soul that God has been faithful in the past and will remain faithful in the future. This perspective sustains faith during prolonged waiting. Waiting is not a punishment, it is a process. It is not evidence that God is unwilling to bless, but proof that God is intentional. Trust that is built in waiting is strong enough to endure storms, setbacks, and opposition. It is refined, tested, and proven. When the answer finally comes, trust does not disappear. It remains as a foundation for the next season of faith. Holding on to God's plan requires more than hope. It requires deliberate, steadfast faith in the face of trials, opposition, and uncertainty. Many people give up too early because they allow circumstances to dictate their belief instead of holding firmly to God's promises. Life often presents challenges that seem impossible to overcome. Yet these moments are the very opportunities God uses to strengthen faith and prepare for breakthrough. Holding on is not simply about enduring, it is about choosing to trust God even when the situation looks hopeless, when doors remain closed, and when human understanding cannot see the path ahead. Faith that holds on does not waver with every wind of difficulty. It anchors itself in the unchanging nature of God, knowing that His plan cannot fail. Breakthrough is rarely instant, and the path to it is seldom smooth. God often allows obstacles to appear, so that His people learn perseverance, patience, and dependence on Him. When we face opposition, we are confronted with a choice. Do we surrender to fear, doubt, and despair, or do we stand firm on the foundation of God's word and promises? Those who choose to hold on discover that challenges are not barriers but stepping stones. Each trial, no matter how painful, is designed to refine, strengthen, and position us for what God has prepared. Holding on requires focus, discipline, and unwavering confidence that God's timing is perfect. Many people fail to experience breakthrough because they quit too soon. They measure progress by immediate results rather than long-term fulfillment. Holding on means resisting the temptation to move ahead prematurely, to take matters into our own hands, or to follow advice that leads away from God's plan. True breakthrough comes only when God is ready, not when we are impatient. To hold on is to align ourselves with His timing, to remain in faith even when the situation has not changed, and to continue trusting in His goodness despite appearances. This kind of faith is active. It demonstrates commitment through consistent prayer, obedience, and perseverance. Holding on also requires courage. The journey often involves confronting fear, criticism, and discouragement. People may question your choices, your faith, or your ability to succeed. Circumstances may intensify, and opposition may multiply. Yet courage is born when we choose to rely on God's promises rather than our own understanding. It is the courage to keep moving forward when the way seems blocked, to keep speaking words of faith when everyone else speaks doubt, and to continue believing when the situation seems impossible. Courage and persistence are inseparable from the act of holding on to God's plan, for faith without action cannot produce breakthrough. Faith that holds on also understands the value of patience. Breakthrough does not come at the moment of desire but at the appointed time of God. Impatience often leads to decisions that compromise destiny. Holding on is a demonstration of trust in God's wisdom and timing. It is believing that God sees the end from the beginning, that every season of waiting, testing, and opposition has a purpose, and that His plan will ultimately prevail. Patience is not passive, it is active hope, an ongoing choice to remain steadfast despite delays and discouragements. Holding on strengthens character. Many people desire blessings without enduring the process that develops resilience, wisdom, and integrity. God's plan is not merely about what we receive, it is about who we become. When we hold on, we are being molded to carry the blessing responsibly. Pressure, trials, and opposition are tools in God's hands, shaping us to be faithful stewards of the promises He has given. Without holding on through the refining process, we may find ourselves unprepared for the fullness of what God intends to release. Faith that holds on is also contagious. When others see a person persevere despite adversity, their own faith is encouraged. Holding on becomes a testimony even before the breakthrough occurs. Your steadfastness can inspire, motivate, and strengthen the faith of those around you. God often multiplies the impact of one life that refuses to let go. The endurance you display in waiting, trusting, and persisting can plant seeds of hope and courage in the hearts of others, creating a ripple effect of faith that extends far beyond your own circumstances. Holding on requires a continual connection with God through prayer, meditation on His Word, and obedience to His guidance. The human heart is easily discouraged, but spiritual disciplines reinforce confidence in God's plan. Prayer is not just a list of requests. It is a conversation that deepens trust and strengthens the resolve to remain faithful. Scripture reminds us that God is faithful to fulfill His promises, and obedience ensures that we remain aligned with His will. This alignment is crucial because breakthrough often occurs when preparation meets opportunity. Holding on keeps us in the place where God can move powerfully on our behalf. Another essential aspect of holding on is resisting doubt. Doubt is the natural response to prolonged difficulty. But persistent faith actively challenges doubt with truth. Every time you remind yourself of God's promises, remember His past faithfulness, and focus on His unchanging nature, doubt loses its grip. Holding on is a spiritual exercise. It requires mental and emotional discipline. It is the deliberate choice to believe God when feelings, logic, or circumstances suggest otherwise. Through this practice, faith grows stronger, courage deepens, and trust becomes unshakable. Holding on also prepares us to recognize and receive breakthrough when it comes. Many fail to hold on and then struggle to recognize the fulfillment of God's plan because they are no longer in position to receive it. Holding on ensures we remain aligned with God's timing, ready to embrace the moment He releases the promise. God often orchestrates multiple events simultaneously, and those who persist are able to recognize the opportunity, step into it confidently, and receive the full measure of His blessing. Finally, holding on transforms our perspective on challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as dead ends, we learn to see them as part of the journey, necessary elements of God's plan that equip, refine, and strengthen us. We begin to understand that breakthrough is not just a change in circumstances, but a process of spiritual growth that prepares us for the responsibilities, influence, and impact that come with answered prayers. Holding on becomes not just an act of faith, but a lifestyle, a commitment to trust God's plan, embrace His timing, and remain steadfast no matter what opposition or delay arises. Through this intentional persistence, our relationship with God deepens. We experience His presence more profoundly, recognize His guidance more clearly, and develop a confidence that transcends fear. Holding on creates an environment in our hearts where breakthrough can flourish, where faith is refined like gold in fire, and where the promises of God are not only received but sustained. It is this unwavering commitment, even in the midst of difficulty, that unlocks the fullness of His plan and positions us for the extraordinary blessings He has prepared. The act of holding on is more than waiting. It is actively believing, consistently praying, steadfastly obeying, and courageously enduring. It is the choice to continue walking the path God has set before us, even when the way is uncertain, opposition is strong, and results are invisible. Each step of holding on strengthens our faith, aligns our heart with God's purposes, and draws us closer to the moment when breakthrough is no longer a promise but a reality. By holding on, we demonstrate to ourselves, to others, and to God that we truly believe His plan is worth every struggle, every delay, and every trial. We prove that our faith is not superficial, not conditional on convenience, and not dependent on circumstances. Holding on is the visible expression of an invisible confidence in God, a determination to trust Him completely, and a commitment to remain in position until the full measure of His blessing manifests in our lives. When we hold on, even in the darkest moments, faith produces strength, perseverance, and resilience. The challenges that once felt overwhelming become opportunities for growth, and the obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome become testimonies of God's power. Holding on positions us to see His hand move in ways that surpass our understanding, to experience blessings that exceed our expectations, and to embrace a future that is brighter than any setback could suggest. It is in the act of holding on that the seeds of breakthrough are nurtured, prepared, and finally released. The power of holding on is that it aligns our hearts with God's timing, deepens our trust, strengthens our character, and positions us for the fullness of His promises. It requires unwavering faith, consistent action, courage, patience, and resilience. Holding on is the bridge between the season of waiting and the moment of breakthrough, a spiritual discipline that cultivates endurance and prepares us to fully embrace the blessings God has ordained. Through this persistent faith, God's plan unfolds, and we are able to experience His promises in their fullness, witnessing firsthand the power, faithfulness, and glory of His work in our lives.